One was the American F-4 Phantom II. It was large, powerful, heavily armed, and equipped with one of the most advanced airborne radar systems of its time. The other was the Soviet-designed MiG-21. It was smaller, lighter, difficult to see, and built to attack quickly before disappearing back toward friendly airfields. On paper, the Phantom appeared to have every advantage. It carried more fuel, more missiles, a stronger radar, 2 crew members, and 2 powerful engines. The MiG-21 carried fewer weapons and had a much shorter combat endurance. Yet over Vietnam, the contest was never decided by specifications alone. The real battle was between 2 different ways of fighting an air war. The F-4 Phantom II had originally been developed for the United States Navy as a fleet defense interceptor. Its primary mission was to detect and destroy enemy bombers before they could attack American aircraft carriers. Speed, radar power, missile range, and climbing performance were considered more important than close-range maneuverability. The Phantom was enormous for a fighter. Its 2 General Electric J79 engines produced tremendous thrust and allowed it to fly faster than twice the speed of sound under favorable conditions. The aircraft had a crew of 2. The pilot flew the airplane and managed the immediate engagement. Behind him sat a radar intercept officer in Navy versions, or a weapons systems officer in later Air Force terminology. The second crew member operated the radar, watched for threats, managed navigation, and helped maintain awareness during complicated missions. This division of labor could be extremely valuable. Vietnamese skies were crowded with strike aircraft, escort fighters, electronic warfare platforms, reconnaissance aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, and anti-aircraft artillery. The backseater helped the pilot understand a battle space that could become chaotic within seconds. The Phantom normally carried 2 main types of air-to-air missiles. The radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow was designed to attack from medium range. The heat-seeking AIM-9 Sidewinder was intended for shorter-range combat. Early Phantom models did not have an internal cannon. American planners believed future air combat would be dominated by guided missiles. They expected fighters to detect opponents at long range and destroy them before a traditional turning battle could begin. The MiG-21 was created around a different set of priorities. It was a lightweight interceptor with a narrow fuselage and distinctive delta wings. It was designed to climb quickly, accelerate rapidly, make a high-speed attack, and return to base. Compared with the Phantom, the MiG-21 was small. That made it more difficult for American pilots to detect visually, especially when it approached from below against the terrain. Its small size also reduced its radar signature. The MiG-21 was not designed to remain over the battlefield for long periods. It had limited internal fuel, a relatively short range, and normally carried only a small missile load. North Vietnamese MiG-21s commonly used Soviet-built infrared-guided missiles, including versions of the R-3S, which was based partly on knowledge gained from an American Sidewinder recovered by the Soviet Union. Some MiG-21 versions also carried an internal cannon, although armament differed among the variants used during the war. The MiG's limitations shaped how North Vietnam employed it. North Vietnamese pilots rarely searched independently across the sky like hunters operating alone. Instead, they became part of an integrated air defense system. Radar stations detected American formations approaching North Vietnam. Information was passed through command centers. Ground controllers then guided MiG pilots toward favorable interception positions. The pilot might not activate his own radar until late in the engagement. This reduced the chance of warning the Americans. The objective was not always to destroy large numbers of aircraft. Sometimes the MiGs only needed to disrupt an American strike. A flight of MiG-21s could approach at high speed, launch missiles, and force bomb-laden aircraft to turn, scatter, or release their weapons early. Even without shooting anything down, they could prevent bombs from reaching the intended target. This was one of the most important realities of the air war. American aircraft often entered combat while protecting a large strike package or carrying bombs themselves. North Vietnamese fighters usually operated closer to their bases, under radar guidance, and with a narrower mission. They could choose when to attack. The Americans often had to continue toward a defended target. The Phantom might have been the stronger aircraft in a direct comparison, but the MiG-21 did not have to fight the Phantom under equal conditions. North Vietnam attempted to create brief moments of advantage. MiG-21s often attacked vulnerable formations from the rear or from high altitude. They could dive through the formation, fire their missiles, and escape before American escorts established a stable firing position. Other fighters, including MiG-17s, sometimes operated at lower altitude. This could create a layered problem. If American fighters remained high, they risked attack by the MiG-21. If they descended and slowed down, they entered conditions where the slower but highly maneuverable MiG-17 could become dangerous. Below them waited another threat. North Vietnam possessed one of the most concentrated air defense networks in the world. Thousands of anti-aircraft guns defended bridges, rail lines, industrial sites, military facilities, and approaches to Hanoi and Haiphong. SA-2 surface-to-air missiles forced American pilots to watch the ground and the sky at the same time. A Phantom maneuvering to avoid a missile battery could lose speed, altitude, formation integrity, or awareness of an approaching MiG. The different defensive systems supported one another. MiGs could push American aircraft toward anti-aircraft guns. Surface-to-air missiles could force them into predictable turns. Those turns could expose them to enemy fighters. The result was not a simple duel between two aircraft. It was a contest between the American strike system and North Vietnam's integrated defense system. American technology also faced restrictions that had not been fully anticipated. The Phantom Sparrow missile was designed to exploit radar and attack from beyond visual range. In Vietnam, rules of engagement frequently required American crews to identify the target visually before firing. The purpose was understandable. Friendly aircraft filled the same airspace, and commanders wanted to prevent American pilots from shooting down their own forces. But visual identification reduced the Phantom's theoretical advantage. Instead of launching from long range, F-4 crews often had to approach close enough to confirm that the radar target was an enemy aircraft. By that point, the engagement could become a turning fight. Early missiles were also less reliable in combat than expected. Missiles were exposed to tropical humidity, repeated carrier landings, rough handling, vibration, heat, and long periods beneath aircraft flying combat missions. Some failed to leave the launch rail correctly. Some motors did not ignite. Some guidance systems lost their targets. Others were fired outside their effective operating limits. Pilots who had trained to trust missiles suddenly found themselves close to enemy fighters with no internal gun. The Sparrow required the Phantom to maintain radar tracking after launch. If the pilot turned too aggressively or lost radar contact, the missile could lose guidance. The early Sidewinder had its own limitations. It normally needed to detect the hot exhaust area behind an enemy aircraft. This meant the Phantom often had to maneuver into the MiG's rear hemisphere before launching. Clouds, the sun, background heat, and sharp turns could interfere with the missile's seeker. The absence of an internal cannon became one of the most famous criticisms of early Phantom variants. Some F-4s carried external gun pods, but these created drag and were not as accurate or responsive as a properly integrated internal weapon. The later F-4E finally received an internal 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon. However, the gun alone did not solve the larger problem. A weapon was only useful when a pilot was trained to reach the correct firing position. During the early years of the Vietnam War, many American fighter crews received limited training in dissimilar air combat. They often practiced against aircraft similar to their own. They did not routinely train against small fighters using tactics like those of the MiG-17 and MiG-21. Air crews also spent much of their time preparing for multiple missions. The Phantom was not used only as a fighter. It flew bombing missions, reconnaissance escort, combat air patrols, suppression missions, and protection for strike formations. A crew could not devote every training flight to close-range air combat. North Vietnamese pilots had their own serious disadvantages. They flew fewer aircraft and faced an enemy with enormous numerical and technological resources. Their bases could be threatened by bombing. Their ground control network could be jammed. Their formations were often small, and fuel limitations gave them little time to recover from a mistake. The MiG-21 could be highly effective when it entered combat with speed and surprise, but once it lost energy, its delta wing produced heavy drag during tight turns. A MiG pilot who stayed too long could lose speed rapidly. The Phantom was heavier, but its two engines gave it powerful acceleration and strong vertical performance. Experienced F-4 crews learned not to fight every MiG in a flat horizontal turn. They could use climbing maneuvers, teamwork, radar coordination, and superior endurance to control the engagement. The Phantom's best weapon was often not one missile or one maneuver. It was cooperation between aircraft. American fighters normally operated in flights whose members protected one another. One Phantom could force a MiG to turn, while another moved into firing position. The second crew member also helped identify threats that the pilot could not see. When Phantom crews maintained their formation and situational awareness, the MiG-21 faced a dangerous opponent. When the formation became separated, the smaller fighter could exploit the confusion. One of the most famous confrontations between the two aircraft came on January 2, 1967. North Vietnamese MiG-21s had been attacking F-105 Thunderchief formations. The F-105 carried much of the Air Force bombing burden over North Vietnam. Loaded with bombs, it was more vulnerable than a Phantom configured primarily for air combat. Colonel Robin Olds and other officers of the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing developed an elaborate deception plan called Operation Bolo. The Americans would make their F-4s appear to be an ordinary F-105 strike force. The Phantoms followed routes, altitudes, timing patterns, radio procedures, and call signs associated with the Thunderchiefs. They also carried electronic equipment that helped reproduce the profile North Vietnamese radar operators expected to see. Ground controllers believed another vulnerable strike formation was approaching. MiG-21s were sent into the air. Instead of finding bomb-loaded F-105s, they encountered F-4 Phantoms prepared for combat. The battle lasted only minutes. American crews claimed 7 MiG-21s destroyed without losing a Phantom. At the time, those losses represented a substantial portion of North Vietnam's available MiG-21 force. Operation Bolo demonstrated what the Phantom could accomplish when surprise, planning, intelligence, teamwork, and aircraft performance were combined. But it did not prove that the MiG-21 was an inferior machine. The operation succeeded partly because North Vietnam had developed predictable interception methods. The Americans studied those methods and built a trap around them. After Bolo, North Vietnamese commanders became more cautious. They adjusted their procedures and temporarily reduced MiG activity while reconsidering their tactics. The struggle continued. During the bombing pause after 1968, both sides had time to analyze earlier combat. When large-scale air fighting resumed in 1972, the contest had changed. The United States Navy had created the Navy Fighter Weapons School, better known as Top Gun. The school emphasized realistic training against aircraft that simulated enemy performance. Crews practiced missile employment, energy management, visual identification, teamwork, and maneuvering against different types of fighters. They studied not only how to fly the Phantom, but how an enemy pilot would attempt to defeat it. Top Gun helped restore skills that had received less attention during the missile-centered years. Navy crews returned to Vietnam with a deeper understanding of close-range combat. The Air Force also introduced improvements. Better versions of the Sparrow and Sidewinder became available. The F-4E brought an internal cannon. Radar support, command and control, electronic warfare, and tactical procedures evolved. Still, 1972 was not an easy victory. North Vietnamese MiG-21 pilots had also improved. They possessed years of combat experience and continued using ground control to create ambushes. They understood American routes, formations, and operational habits. The fighting during Operations Linebacker and Linebacker II included some of the most intense aerial engagements of the war. On May 10, 1972, Navy fighters fought repeated engagements with North Vietnamese MiGs. Lieutenant Randy Cunningham and Lieutenant Junior Grade William Driscoll became the first American fighter crew of the Vietnam War officially credited with 5 aerial victories. Their final engagement that day became famous for an extended fight against a highly skilled MiG-17 pilot. Although that duel involved a MiG-17 rather than a MiG-21, it demonstrated the renewed importance of maneuvering skill. Other Phantom crews scored victories against MiG-21s using improved tactics and missiles. The Air Force also produced its own aces. Captain Richard Stephen Ritchie became the first Air Force pilot ace of the war. His weapons systems officers, including Captain Charles de Bellevue, played a crucial role in detecting targets and managing missile attacks. De Bellevue was ultimately credited with 6 victories, making him the highest-scoring American ace of the Vietnam War. These successes showed that the Phantom's 2-man crew could be a major advantage when both members worked as a coordinated team. But victory claims from any air war must be treated carefully. American and North Vietnamese records do not always agree. Pilots could see an aircraft smoking or descending and believe it had been destroyed, while the damaged fighter might later recover. Several crews could fire at the same target. Aircraft lost to missiles, fuel exhaustion, accidents, or ground fire might be assigned different causes by opposing sides. For this reason, exact comparisons vary depending on the records and definitions being used. What is clear is that neither aircraft dominated every engagement. The F-4 achieved more victories overall and was an extraordinarily capable multi-role aircraft. It could carry heavy bomb loads, operate from land bases or aircraft carriers, intercept enemy fighters, escort strike packages, and survive significant damage. The MiG-21 could not match that versatility, but North Vietnam did not need it to perform every mission. It needed the MiG-21 to protect selected targets, disrupt bombing formations, and impose costs on a much larger air force. In that role, the MiG could be remarkably effective. The MiG-21 was most dangerous when it remained part of a larger defensive network. Radar operators found the targets. Ground controllers positioned the fighters. Surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft guns restricted American movement. The pilot then attacked at the moment chosen for him. The Phantom was most dangerous when American crews had accurate intelligence, maintained formation discipline, understood missile limitations, and used teamwork instead of relying on technology alone. Each aircraft reflected the military system behind it. The MiG-21 was simple, compact, and optimized for controlled interception. The F-4 was powerful, flexible, complex, and designed to carry advanced weapons across long distances. The MiG relied heavily on ground direction. The Phantom gave its crew more independent capability, but also demanded greater coordination and training. Their battles revealed a central lesson of aerial warfare. The best aircraft on paper does not automatically win. Pilot training, intelligence, rules of engagement, maintenance, weapons reliability, ground control, mission objectives, and tactical surprise can matter more than top speed or missile range. The Phantom entered Vietnam as a symbol of the missile age. Its designers believed advanced radar and guided weapons were making traditional dogfighting obsolete. Vietnam proved that the prediction had arrived too early. Missiles would eventually become far more reliable. Radar systems would improve. Identification technology would make long-range engagements more practical. But during the 1960s and early 1970s, American crews still needed the ability to fight at visual range. The MiG-21 helped force that realization. The lessons contributed to major changes in American fighter development and training. Future fighters would combine advanced radar and missiles with high maneuverability, better cockpit visibility, internal cannons, and specialized air combat training. Aircraft such as the F-15 and F-16 emerged from an era shaped partly by the frustrations and lessons of Vietnam. Training organizations increasingly treated the enemy as an intelligent opponent whose tactics had to be studied realistically. Pilots learned to respect smaller aircraft and to understand energy, position, and awareness, rather than depending only on technology. The MiG-21 and F-4 Phantom therefore left a legacy much larger than their individual victories. Their confrontations exposed the gap between how engineers imagined air combat and how it actually unfolded. They showed that advanced equipment could fail under operational conditions. They proved that a weaker force could challenge a stronger one by choosing the time, location, and purpose of the engagement. And they demonstrated that successful air combat required more than an aircraft. It required an entire system. In a direct fight, the F-4 possessed greater radar power, heavier armament, longer endurance, and the advantage of 2 crew members. The MiG-21 offered a smaller visual profile, rapid acceleration, a strong climb rate, and the ability to strike from carefully prepared ambush positions. Neither machine was invincible. A MiG pilot who attacked with surprise could destroy a Phantom before the American crew understood what was happening. A Phantom team that detected the MiG early and preserved its energy could turn the engagement against the smaller fighter. The outcome depended on who saw the enemy first, who entered with the greater energy advantage, whose weapons functioned correctly, and whose formation maintained control. That is why the struggle between the MiG-21 and the F-4 Phantom remains one of the most studied fighter rivalries of the Cold War. It was not simply East against West. It was not simply a lightweight fighter against a heavy fighter. It was a confrontation between technological confidence and tactical adaptation. The Phantom demonstrated the potential of radar, guided missiles, and coordinated 2-man crews. The MiG-21 demonstrated the value of simplicity, surprise, ground control, and fighting only when conditions were favorable. Both aircraft survived the Vietnam War and continued serving around the world for decades. But the most enduring result of their encounters was not written on a victory scoreboard. It was written into the training programs, weapons, and fighter aircraft that followed. Over Vietnam, the MiG-21 and the F-4 Phantom taught the same unforgiving lesson to both sides. Technology can provide an advantage. Only tactics, training, discipline, and human judgment can turn that advantage into victory.